We're learning right now a lot more about the American detained in Russia, accused of being a spy. Paul Whelan was arrested in Moscow on Friday. Let's go to my colleague Marty Savage. He has more on this man, the story. Look, we're learning more details. This is someone who had frequently traveled to Russia and whose family says he was there for a wedding. The Russian government says something else.
Right, they do indeed. The family had been very anxious because they say the last time they heard from Paul Whelan was around the 28th of December. He lives here in Novi, Michigan, here, a suburb of Detroit, and he was a frequent traveler to go to Russia. He is a former Marine, retired Marine, I should say, and he works in corporate security for an auto parts manufacturer. So he's gone to Russia several times for personal reasons as well as for work. He was in Russia. He arrived on the 22nd to attend a wedding of a fellow Marine. The wedding was supposed to happen, as they say, on the 28th. He didn't show up, and that's when everyone became worried because that was so unlike him. When he travels, he usually stays in close contact with his family, especially his parents. And then they get the notification that he has been detained. They find that the reason for him being held by the Russians is absolutely preposterous. They are hoping that American officials will have a chance to actually talk to him. They had been gravely concerned because they thought perhaps he might have suffered some kind of tragedy. It is still extremely serious for them, but at least they know his whereabouts right now, Poppy.
Okay, Martin Savage there in Novi, Michigan, where he is from. Again, this is a man who was born in Canada. The State Department refers to him as an American citizen. And again, his family wants answers. Before we get to his brother, who will speak to us in just a moment in his first interview, let me go to Moscow. My colleague Matthew Chance is there. So, Matthew, walk us through what the Russian Federation is saying at this point.
Well, Poppy, they're not saying a great deal, it has to be said. They just made this very sort of stiff announcement by the FSB, which is the main counter espionage agency here in Russia, saying they'd arrested a US citizen on the 28th of December in the Russian capital, Moscow. They said he was caught spying, but no other detail was given about what exactly he was said to have been doing when he was detained. The Russian Foreign Ministry also said they'd formally notified the US authorities of the detention, which was confirmed by the State Department as well. But in terms of detail, very, very sparse information coming out about what this individual may or may not have been concerned with. It does come just a couple of weeks after Maria Butina, who's a pro-gun lobbyist held in the United States, pleaded guilty to conspiracy there and faces 6 months in prison after US prosecutors said that she tried to infiltrate US conservative groups like the NRA and the Republican Party to influence Americans. And there's some speculation that you know, in the future, there could be some sort of trade-off between these two individuals. But beyond that, there's no relationship between the Butina case and the Paul Whelan case, as far as we're aware. Poppy.
Okay, Matthew Chance, I know you're asking for more answers. Please let us know if you get them. Thank you very much for that, reporting live from Moscow this morning. On the phone with me now is David Whelan. He is the twin brother of Paul. Paul Whelan, again, is the American detained on Friday in Russia on espionage charges. You see him there. The Russian government says he is a spy. Let me bring in his brother, David. His twin brother, David. This is your first interview, I should note. Thank you for taking the time on this New Year's morning to speak with us.
Thank you, Poppy. I appreciate the time.
Of course. What can you tell us first just about your brother? As we look at his picture here, what do you want everyone to know?
Well, it's funny because I think sometimes we don't think about how we would describe our family members until we're in a situation like this.
Yeah.
Paul's a very kind and generous person. I think he's well known for that. He's gregarious among friends, although maybe not comfortable in larger groups. He's loyal to a fault with his family and friends. He's just a very nice person.
Obviously, there are a lot of answers that you want. So let's take through this slowly. Walk us through what you know at this point, what you've been told by the government, by the State Department, perhaps anyone at the White House about your brother being taken into custody in Russia on these espionage charges. What have they said to you?
We don't really know very much. The government has been helpful. Family members, my family members, have been in contact with people at the State Department and at the embassy in Moscow, and we have heard that they have received an announcement from the Russian government that Paul's been detained, but they have not yet been able to have consular access with Paul. And I believe that there's a 72-hour window, so we're sort of waiting for that to pass.
There is. So
and I'm not sure if, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, there is a 72-hour window, so let's talk about that. You guys have been told, as I understand it, that there is a 72-hour window before the U.S. Embassy and representatives can meet with Paul, check on his well-being, et cetera. That 72-hour window would have, one would assume, started on Friday. I know you guys have been anxiously awaiting that to pass. It seems like that window would be closed at this point.
Yes, I'm not sure how the timing on that is told.
Okay. So have you reached out to the White House or have you heard from the White House or the president?
No, not from the White House or the president, but we have reached out to congressional representatives for Michigan, which is where Paul and my family are based. And we look forward to, when we finally have access to Paul, hearing about his condition and helping him to get a lawyer to take on these criminal charges and continue to try and work with the American government to have him released.
Tell me about what your brother does. We understand he was in security. He did security contract work and had traveled to Russia a number of times.
Yeah, Paul and I are chalk and cheese, and so I can describe it, but I'm a librarian describing corporate security, and so I may not get it right. My understanding is that he was responsible for looking at the physical security of sites for his employer, to make sure that things couldn't be stolen or broken into, to remove the opportunities for people to have access to things that they shouldn't have access to. But it wasn't cybersecurity. It wasn't bodyguard type of security. It was much more about the physical plant.
Who did he work for?
His current employer is Borg Warner. Okay.
When is the last time, David, that you did hear from him? Because you say that it's unusual that you wouldn't hear from him on the 28th, Friday, the day he was supposed to attend the wedding. So when is the last time you did speak with him?
I don't speak to him very often. We often communicate over email and things, but he communicates much more regularly with my parents, and so they were surprised not to see any photos from him. He had been particularly worried that they were on a winter staycation and some mischief might happen to them while he was out of the country. They are older and it's snowy in Michigan. And of course, we have a family pet and he's concerned about the dog. So there were a number of things that he would normally have been checking in to see how the vet's appointment had gone or to make sure no one had broken a hip. And it was that lack of communication that first twigged us that something might be wrong. But it wasn't until Monday morning that we knew for sure he'd been detained.
Is there anything that concerned you about his travel to Russia? Did you have any concern ahead of this trip or any of his trips to Russia that he could be detained, that he could be arrested?
Not more than any other tourist traveling to many countries in the world. Paul is a former Marine. He's former law enforcement. He does corporate security. And he travels extensively. So I think as far as people who are aware of the risks of travel and being prepared to, avoid whatever risks are possible, I think Paul is probably as best situated as anybody could be, even in a country like Russia.
There is no world in which you suspect that your brother in any way worked as a spy for the U.S. government. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Can you tell us a bit about his military service?
I only know what he told me. I know for sure he was in Iraq in the early 2000s, and he did multiple tours in Iraq. Names like Al-Assad Air Base, Anbar Province, that's the sort of thing that I heard about. And he wasn't terribly forthcoming with his military.
New promises and new threats from North Korea. In his New Year's speech, leader Kim Jong-un says he's willing to sit down with President Trump at any time, but Kim also warned that his country could take a new path if the U.S. pushes ahead with sanctions.
If the U.S. does not keep the promise it made in front of the world and misinterprets our people's patience and makes one-sided demands and continues down the path of sanctions and pressure on our republic, then we have no choice but to defend our country's sovereignty and supreme interest and find a new way to settle peace on our peninsula.
Joining me now to discuss this is CNN national security analyst Samantha Vinograd. She served on the National Security Council under President Obama. So, Sam, We just heard from Kim Jong-un. At the same time, President Trump, in his New Year's message, touted his relationship with North Korea as being a big success and that he's in no rush to figure things out over there. I mean, it seems to be a disconnect between these two leaders, at least in the public face that they're presenting to their people.
Well, Ryan, the more things change, the more they stay the same. It may be a new year, but North Korea, and frankly President Trump, isn't taking a new approach. Kim Jong-un is threatening the United States and putting the blame on us and saying that we should lift sanctions, which is one of his favorite things to do, while concurrently continuing to build his nuclear program. Arguably, from an analytic perspective, the threat from North Korea has actually increased over the last 12 months, despite the summit in Singapore, rather than decrease, as President Trump would like to say.
What do you make of the way that Kim Jong-un presented himself in this speech? It seems different. He's in a library. He's wearing a suit as opposed to a military uniform. Does that represent a shift for Kim in terms of how he presents himself to the world?
Well, he was also surrounded by pictures of his family. Right. And we have to remember that this isn't just a message towards President Trump. This is a message domestically as well. And from a domestic perspective, Kim Jong-un has actually done a really good job over the last year. Let's just think about it. He has continued to stockpile fissile material and the stuff that's used to make nuclear weapons. Secretary of State Pompeo said that himself. Right. He is marching ahead with the crown jewel of his nuclear program while continuing to be embraced on a world stage and inching even closer toward integration with South Korea and other world economies. The last thing that he needs to do is convince the United States to lift sanctions so that he can get the economic benefit of this warm embrace from the global community. And that's probably going to be his New Year's resolution.
Yeah. Well, it is a new year, and that means a new, more intense level of scrutiny for the president from the House of Representatives. The Democrats will take control of the chamber in just 2 days from now. And it's not just expected Speaker Nancy Pelosi, who is about to make she's about to make Trump's life harder. I want to bring in CNN politics reporter Lauren Fox. She is here with 5 more Democrats who are likely to battle the president in a big way in 2019. So, Lauren, some of these Democrats will be digging into a topic that's even more sensitive, arguably, to the president than Russia, and that, of course, is his finances.
Absolutely. A new cast of characters in the House of Representatives starting this Thursday, Pam. And I want to start with Richard Neal. He is the incoming chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, and he is the Democrat on Capitol Hill who has the power to ask for President Donald Trump's tax returns. Now, a source familiar told me last month that Richard Neal will ask for the president's tax returns. He will make a formal request to Treasury anytime in this new year. Now, there are still discussions about exactly when he will ask for them, but you can expect a protracted legal battle between the House of Representatives and the President of the United States when it comes to something Trump hasn't wanted to turn over before, Pam. Now, he's not the only person that's going to be looking into the president's finances. Maxine Waters, the incoming chairman of the House Financial Services Committee, also wants to look into any ties that the Trump organization has with Russia. Now, she is looking specifically for those kind of financial ties from the president, and she's tangled with President Trump in the past. She is beloved by the Democratic base, and she has said in the past that she thinks President Trump should be impeached. So she is going to be somebody at the forefront of this fight to do oversight into the Trump administration, and you can expect her to be a fierce critic of President Trump's. Now, Elijah Cummings is the incoming chairman of the House Oversight Committee, and he arguably has the most jurisdiction of any chairman coming in to look into the Trump administration, to conduct oversight. His committee can look into everything from immigration to security clearances on Capitol Hill, or at the White House, excuse me. And I talked to him last month. He told me that he expects to bring in a wide variety of cabinet secretaries before his committee, including Wilbur Ross, the Commerce Secretary. He has questions about how a question about citizenship ended up on the census. Now, we should also look to Adam Schiff. This has been somebody who is tangled with the president on the Russia investigation. He thinks Republicans haven't answered enough questions, and he has more questions. He looks to open up the Russia investigation. He wants to bring in folks like Michael Flynn before his committee. But there's one more person you should be paying attention to, and that is the House Judiciary Committee Chairman, Jerry Nadler. His sole focus is going to be protecting the Mueller investigation, but he'll look into the president's impact on immigration, the rise of white nationalism in the country, and he is the person who's going to be leading any impeachment effort if Democrats decide to go down that path in 2019, Pam.